Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Diane Hoskins, and I am the Global Policy Director for Carbon to Sea Initiative. And I want to especially thank Running Tide for sponsoring today's panel, and to the Ocean Pavilion for this incredible programming at the nexus of the climate crisis and protecting our oceans. To set the stage, this is going to be a really exciting conversation. We have a really great panel. For those of you who don't know, Carbon to Sea Initiative is a nonprofit effort that brings together leading funders and world-class scientists to explore ocean alkalinity enhancement, a carbon dioxide removal approach that strengthens the ocean's natural ability to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And we take a science-first mindset. So why are we talking about this? Our ocean covers 70% of our planet, and it plays a big role in helping to stabilize our climate by absorbing excess atmospheric carbon dioxide. But this natural process comes at a cost. It makes our oceans hotter, more acidic, and less habitable for marine wildlife and fish. Even as the world accelerates our transition to clean energy and reduces dependence on fossil fuels, there's scientific consensus that carbon dioxide removal will be necessary to mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis. And given the increasing attention that's been placed on marine carbon dioxide removal, from experts like the National Academies of Science, the IPCC, and others, there's a real need to accelerate the asking and answering of key open questions. Is it safe? Is it effective? Is it permanent? Is it scalable? There's a lot of good reason to be excited about these approaches, and in order to figure out if ocean-based carbon removal is a good idea, we have to do the research. Part of the research is going to involve testing it in the water. We've got to get out of the lab and into the real world. There's a natural progression of observational science on ocean-based carbon removal. It's a natural process. One, you begin in the lab, then to the mesocosm, which is really just a fancy word for tank, and then finally to responsible field trials. In lab and mesocosm studies, scientists can isolate questions in highly controlled settings, going parameter by parameter. And as you're moving to mesocosms, you will try to understand if all of the things you were able to find in the lab were able to hold as you were going forward. You're getting closer to reality. But really, the field trial research is truly the stage when you're confronting your hypothesis in a highly complex system. There's just no way to replicate the complexity of the ocean in the lab. In mesocosms or in the lab, which is why the real world is so crucially needed. When we get into the ocean, that's when policy begins to play a big role. So today I'm pleased that we're joined by Leonardo Valenzuela Pérez from Ocean Visions. Kiddi, I won't try to pronounce your last name. I would just butcher it. So you'll have to tell us your last name from Running Tide, as well as Mike Kelland with Planetary Technologies. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation at the intersection of our research needs and our policy needs. And so I'll take a seat and join the panel. So thanks for everyone for being here. Well, thank you. To kick it off, I think that it would be great to start kind of like at the beginning. The climate crisis, huge challenge. Tell me about what brings you to this work? Why are you passionate about it? How'd you get on the stage today?
Yeah, thank you for hosting, Diane, and thank you to the Ocean Pavilion for hosting this tremendous program throughout the week. I was here last year as well and saw all the program there, and it's been a big, it's multiplied in size and impact, I think. So, before moving my life fully into climate, I had been working in tech and business and kind of this climb the corporate ladder. Great prospects, moving to the Big Apple, getting a lot of extra letters in front of my VP title, et cetera. Then I had this, and this is going to sound really cliche, this life-changing moment of having a child. so my daughter, who's now 2 years old. She's really sick, both sick of me being away, but mainly just sick. And that kind of changed a lot of my thinking, because then I thought, like, okay, I've now been kind of optimizing for myself, but I look at this little creature that I love more than anything in the world, and like, how can I not spend every living second trying to make the world a habitable place for her once I'm gone or in the future? And there's like really neither logical nor emotional reason not to do that. So that's kind of when I started looking around. A lot of classic Scandinavian random text messages ended up with me meeting the Running Tide team, and the Running Tide team ending up in Iceland, which we are now operating out of. So that's kind of how I ended there.
Thanks.
Welcome. Yeah, so I got into this space, I think, through, for me, it was really looking at how climate change was affecting the areas and the spaces that I love and that I grew up in. And there's this idea out there, and I'm going to butcher this word, but I think it's synesthesia. Anyway, it's this idea of being homesick for somewhere you haven't left. And really, that's what I kind of feel right now when it comes to climate change. I grew up in Ottawa in Canada. I grew up mostly in the backwoods around Ottawa in a canoe as much as I possibly could. And looking at that place, the place that I come from, the place that I, identify with in nature, and seeing how much it's changing and how much we're fundamentally losing as we go. And we're not even facing the worst effects yet of climate change. And I live in a place that is incredibly privileged in terms of, being buffered from a lot of the effects of climate change, wealthy country, Northern Hemisphere, the whole thing. And we're still seeing those effects, and we're still seeing those damages and those losses. And for me, it was seeing that and saying, first of all, how do I learn as much as possible about this? And then learning about it and getting into it and saying, what are the highest impact, highest leverage things that we should be doing that we're not yet doing in this space? And to me, marine carbon dioxide removal and getting research there and going forward, so promising, so underinvested, so underexplored, that we really need to put a huge focus on learning about this and progressing forward to see if it's something that will make an impact, because it looks like it really could. So that, for me, that's how I got into it.
Well, for me, I come from, I would say, environmental activism background. So I was doing a bit of like anti-dams campaigning. I got into academia for activist reasons. I got a PhD in geography, just like looking at the conflicts, looking at issues in the mining sector. But there was a point where all these things were colliding and feeling like being there was not really, like I had a moment in the Arctic. I was doing a postdoc there and just realizing that I was not doing much, and I was not going to go into many places, at least for myself. Like I'm not saying that academia is, like there is a lot of relevance, but for me that was not the call, and I moved into human rights and environment in the nonprofit sector, mostly climate displacement issues with environmental defenders in areas that are being ravaged by many challenging conditions. And at one point, I had this moment of seeing like the extent of the crisis, and looking back, and when I was at Sydney University teaching about geoengineering and being in this very adversarial position of how so many of these paths were the craziest thing in the universe, and then feeling, well, we got to the point where we would need to include everything, every option, anything that could be possibly developed to understand how we can address this major challenge, because the agenda was not enough, the agenda was not moving enough, and there was a need to see how we can step it up.
It's super exciting to hear the diverse set of experiences that kind of all bring you here. I'd love to hear more about why field trials. What is the role of your organization to advance these?
Sure. So I can jump in. My co-founder is Dr. Greg Rao. He worked out of Lawrence Livermore National Labs for many, many decades on exactly these issues and working with the global carbon cycle and looking at what we do, which is purely ocean alkalinity enhancement. So maybe just a quick step on that. Planetary takes alkaline materials that are sort of high reactivity, things like what are called hydroxides, and we dose those into the ocean using permitted pipes, so essentially wastewater and cooling water loops for power plants and things like that. And that's our business model. Of course, right now, field trials is where we're at, but it's a whole lot of science and focus around those technologies and how that works. And so Dr. Greg Rao was working on this for a really, really long time. And, in the lab and, collaborating and things like this, I think for us, what we see is that field trials is the stage that this is at now. We're not at a point where we want to scale out and say we're going to go to gigatons. Like we're nowhere near that yet. We're also past the point of doing things in beakers, right? We know how that works, and so responsibly developed, small scale, well managed, scientifically focused field trials is really, I think, where we're at in terms of developing this technology and moving forward. And the urgency right now, from my perspective, is putting a huge amount of energy into those field trials and ensuring that at the end of the day, not only are they responsible, but we're learning as much as we possibly can is absolutely critical for us to progress forward. So this isn't about sort of like, running to scale. It's about having a huge amount of urgency around learning as much as we can right now, and I think that's the focus.
That was a great answer. I don't think I need to add anything to it. Talk about what you guys do. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about what we do, and why part of it, why field trials are important to us. So we do multi-pathway carbon removal in the ocean. So there are mainly two pathways in the ocean. One is through the sequestration of biomass, marine or terrestrial, and the other one is ocean alkalinity enhancement. We try to combine all three in a open ocean deployed method where we deploy terrestrial biomass that's been coated in alkaline materials, seeded with macroalgae spores. The system floats, absorbs water, the macroalgae grows, the alkaline materials dissolve, all that impacts the CO2 or the carbon cycle, and then the carbon, both bound in the biomass, the marine and terrestrial biomass, sinks to the bottom of the ocean and sequesters it. But I think for us, because we're doing it in the open ocean, and some people say that that's going to be a part where, if this ever gets deployed at any meaningful scale, where a lot of this will happen, the open ocean is quite a bit different from coastal environments. Not only from a scientific perspective, but also from a doing things perspective. Like, it's way more dangerous. You have to move differently. You have to do things differently. So being able to do that in a responsible and kind of incremental manner means that we can develop not only the science and knowledge, but also the knowledge about how to do the work in the open ocean, which is also part of the reason why we're in Iceland, which is one of the leading nations in maritime operations when it comes to like fishing. Like we're one of the few nations in the world where there hasn't been a fisherman death in the last decades because of safety focus and such like that. So.
Well, from Ocean Vision's perspective, at Ocean Visions we build collaboration, so we bring all sectors to collaborate to understand how all these ocean climate solutions can be advanced. We work, and one of our lines of work is marine CDR, but it's also decarbonization, and it's also repairing of critical ecosystems. So all these areas require some level of field trials, like any development of a commercial product, or even like any development of a method requires this scientific approach to them. So we are facing the issue that these are quite novel approaches, and that leads to this situation that becomes adversarial because it's seen as something that it's imposed, and that's the part where we need to like figure out ways where this could be part of the scientific process that could be done in a responsible way and a collaborative way. And there is just the challenge of how field trials are things that can also be done as part of international collaboration, which is really crucial for this to become part of the agenda and to make a clear understanding that this is a complementary part of the climate agenda. This is not a replacement for other methods. That should not be a competition. This is a complement, but it's a relevant complement that will take many years to be developed, and that requires this approach.
Couldn't agree more in terms of the need to accelerate phasing out fossil fuels as rapidly as possible and meeting the needs on our carbon removal, as the IPCC has said. Kiddi, you started to talk a little bit about your Running Tides work in Iceland. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more background on why Iceland. How did they get so interested? And in particular, any thoughts for other countries who are interested, thinking about this?
Yeah, I might go on a little bit of a happy rant because I'm proud of my country for some of these things. But if we just rewind a little bit back, Iceland has already had a sustainability crisis. It was in the 80s where we almost overfished our entire fish stock, and then we more or less invented the IFQ, or the transferable quota, which was implemented implemented using best available science in a broad partnership between the government and the industry. And now we have the most sustainable fisheries in the world. We have the most advanced technologists building fisheries technology. We have the safest fisheries in the world. And like the fishermen at home will probably, not fully agree, but like the fishermen have a really good job now, and it's a really sought after job. So it's a completely different world from where we were. And this was because what I would view is the quota system was the first kind of sustainability driven government intervention. Now the climate crisis becomes a big thing, and we look at what we're doing, and Iceland has dealt with the two biggest things: heating and cooling of cities with geothermal, that's green, and the electricity generation, that's green already as well. So like we are already punching at the scraps. Like the hard to abate sectors is what we're working on. But with a lot of work, collaborative work from all over the world, we become pioneers in carbon sequestration with Carbfix. We become the location for the first commercial direct air capture plant with Climeworks. And as part of that, the government from several years ago put in their platform that Iceland should become a cradle for green, innovative project, especially in the carbon removal sector. And this means not only funding, but also clearing regulatory issues, providing platforms, connecting internationally, et cetera, et cetera. And half a year later, Iceland's biggest political party gets more specific on that agenda item and says, hey, we are a fishing and ocean-based nation, and the ocean is in rapid decline, and we need to invest heavily in understanding what's going on. We need to invest heavily in understanding what we can do to potentially mitigate, and they have that on their agenda now, and I think it's one of the first kind of political parties that have that in the top line of their environmental agenda in the world. And that's, all of that, plus the capabilities that are already there, some classic Nordic connections, just like friends, and that our founder, having worked there before, having built up connections there, ended up with Running Tide going there, and we were met with just really great partnerships. We have partnerships across the entire spectrum of industry, academia, research institutions. We just founded the first ocean innovation platform in Iceland with the University of Iceland, and Carbon to Sea and Ocean Visions and us and more. So like it's the beginning of that kind of ecosystem, and I think that's this kind of pioneering mindset is a big portion of why we're there.
Thank you. And so Mike, your planetary is leading some exciting work in Canada, and so going back across the pond, so to speak. Can you speak a little bit more about that project? How is it going? And also the innovative partnership you have with academic institutions there on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So Planetary is working in a number of jurisdictions, but home base is Canada. And Halifax is where I think we've made the most progress. And and done the most, and it's a really exciting thing. It really is exciting. So in Canada, we are tightly partnered with Dalhousie University, both the university itself and the Ocean Frontier Institute, and we're working on a really comprehensive research program that's been going on for about 3 years now, and it culminated with a field trial that we just finished conducting in the Bedford Basin in partnership with Nova Scotia Power, so using their cooling water loop to dose alkalinity into the basin. And it was monitored from a biological perspective, from a chemical perspective, and from a physical oceanography perspective. So a huge amount of research, a lot of investment came into that from a bunch of different places. We had Canadian federal government investment through the NSERC program. We had investment through the Canada First Research Grant, which I'll come back to in a second, and then investment through Carbon to Sea as well. And really bringing together some amazing scientists to ensure that this was very responsibly run, that we, again, learned an awful lot, and we're still sort of parsing the data now of all the stuff that we've learned and coming out from that. The Canadian federal government has invested in the Canadian First Research Grant into something called Transforming Climate Action. And what this is it's the largest grant that Dalhousie University's ever had, at $152 million from the Canadian federal government, looking at the intersection of the climate ocean nexus, essentially, and with 3 pillars. The central pillar of that is this mitigation pillar, which is the kind of work that we're doing now on marine carbon dioxide removal has a huge component of that. And looking at that grant, $152 million, that actually catalyzed matching funds to bring the total grant size up to $400 million. And so this is a huge program focused on where we can take this forward. Working out there now, we've been working with regulators, we've been working with local companies. It really is forming a hugely powerful research hub to say, how can we rapidly understand this, rapidly bring it forward, and answer a huge number of questions in this area. One last thing I'll say, and I'll just put in the plug for Halifax, because you talked about Iceland, so I'm going to talk about Halifax a little bit. So Halifax is a region that has a massive amount of blue economy power. There's a lot of ocean tech PhDs in the region. There's a lot of investment in ocean tech out there, and it's uniquely situated in that it is a deepwater harbor surrounded with a city and a world-class oceanographic university right there. Some of my team who are oceanographers who've done their research cruises and things like that kind of have a weird dissonance in that they get to go out and do field work and this really great sort of trials and then sleep in their own bed at night. Or go out to a restaurant at night. And that's just like a weird dissonance that they have. So it's a really neat place to do this work. And building up that expertise and that investment, I think, is going to really progress the field in the space.
Thanks. And so, Leo, Ocean Visions is working to accelerate ocean solutions research and development and facilitating multi-sector collaborations, especially to establish which pathways are most promising to tackle the climate crisis in a responsible way. Tell us more about what you currently see as some of the roadblocks and how we could better enable this process successfully.
Sure. So first thing that I will say is that Ocean Visions just launched about a few weeks ago a high-level roadmap where the concept is to say we need to figure out by the end of this decade what works and what doesn't work, and that is, again, as part of this complementary agenda, not an agenda that replaces what is part of the negotiations today. We're a COP, like we need to understand what is being discussed and how this has a very political weight, but in understanding that we need to work now through an issue of trust. So there is a high-level roadmap from Ocean Visions. We have like a sense of what will be necessary to understand the viability of many of these pathways, but there, as part of that roadmap, we also need to build trust, and that I think is key. It's an area of where transparency will be very necessary, transparency from companies and other agents, but where we also need to bridge agendas, get understanding on this. Like, we need to consider that there are elements that need to be taken more carefully, and yeah, we need a plan for this, but we need a plan where we put at the center bringing more people into this space, bringing more people to understand what's happening in these areas, and also showing that there are benefits. Even if not all of these pathways, technologies, methods are deployed, there is a way where this could be a meaningful area of investment for ocean sciences and industry. So that is a very relevant component, especially like beyond the north of the world, beyond the United States and other areas. It's really important to invest in ocean sciences. We need to understand what is happening around the world, like in our oceans, and we need to understand what's happening with acidification, what's happening with ocean warming, and this process could be part of that. So figuring out the way where this could be an ally of the ocean agenda, where this could be an ally of the ocean, like the climate agenda, I think that is key. And what it's being done right now, I think it is very relevant. They're like pieces of the big monster that we need to tame in this case. And of course, there is fear, and we need to understand that fear, understand that things have been done wrong in other areas in the past, and this is for an international perspective. But yeah, now we need to model how there could be another way to do things, and I think that's a key part to move the roadblocks that are right now for the advancement of science in this area.
Wonderful. So obviously, trust, huge in terms of that, and multi-sector collaborations, really, really important. In the policy space, there's been some maybe, let's say, allergy to some of these collaborations in the policy sector, but so critical to building the trust. I'm curious from the private sector perspective, could you talk to or speak to the collaborations, the multi-sector collaborations on your projects? How's it going? Why is it so important? And what lessons can we take to the policy space to ensure that those collaborations, which, as Leo said, are so crucial to building trust, are able to move forward?
Sure. I also maybe want to because I had a comment that I wanted to unrelated to.
Oh, you got to be faster next time. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But it's on the. I think there's a need to, like, the obvious and can't be overstated need to A, reduce, remove, stop the emissions, B, work on these solutions, but also do it as fast as humanly possible in the most responsible way as possible, right? And I think one way to do that is to look where people have been doing similar things for some time before and try to learn what they've been doing. And I forgot this in my Iceland speech earlier, but like our Nordic cousins, Norway and Sweden, they've been doing what they call river liming now for 40 years. They've been using alkaline materials to mitigate acid rain. They've been putting alkaline materials in the tens of thousands of tons into the rivers. It's for 45-ish years. They're very proud of their progress there. There's a lot of research, scientific, so like all types of research about the impacts. What are the usable levels of this kind of material versus that, and kind of all the kind of details. And I think if we want to move at as fast as humanly possible, we should also be looking to, like, learning from people that have been doing things before and integrating that into our current work. Not start from scratch if people have done some of that before.
So are you learning from them?
Well, yes. I mean, that's like we are engaged in conversation with the specialists from example NIVA who have been doing this, and like where they've to understand how river liming has been working with them, and what is the next step there, and like what kind of learnings we can draw from that into the ocean alkalinity enhancement discussion.
And I guess to connect the dot, I'm hearing in the acid rain context, and for rivers, the use of alkalinity has already been figured out. The value, yes. The co-benefits, on a policy perspective, has already been figured
yes.
out. I think it's not necessarily intuitive, but the way that laws are written, the way the river is regulated or overseen is very different. If you're standing on the beach, if you put your toes in the water, or if you walk 3 miles out in the U.S. context, or out to 200 to the extent of the EEZ or beyond, right? So you're kind of raising this interesting question around regulatory differences in different places. Yeah.
Yeah, and also like from the safety perspective, what do we know already?
Correct.
Based on that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I know there's other folks in Canada who are also doing this, but Mike, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I agree 100% with what Kiddi's saying, which is that, I think that within this regulatory frameworks, we don't yet have regulatory frameworks that are going to specifically focus on climate, right? It's just something that we haven't yet built into our regulatory frameworks anywhere, really, the sort of risk-benefit equation of dealing with climate in a lot of ways. And that's true in water as much as it is in DAC or anything else, right? So across the board. So we fundamentally, I think, if we're going to make progress in terms of understanding how we should, eventually work with these, what the trade-off should be, where we're going to learn, we are going to have to work within the framework we have today. And I think that's really, really critical. As Kiddi says, we're not starting from scratch, though, in any of these ways. River liming, I think, is one thing which is very analogous to what's happened out there. But even just in a direct ocean context, aquaculture facilities use alkalinity all the time, especially with our acidifying oceans. Places like the west coast of North America, you can't really run a shellfish farm on the west coast of North America unless you are adding alkalinity. It's just you're not going to get any yield out of that growing of that shellfish farm. And so this is something that's happening already, and it's been well studied. Wastewater facilities use hydroxides all the time, lime, magnesia, because their waste streams going out to the ocean are too acidic, or the bugs that they use to consume the biological matter, all the bacteria and everything like that within those treatment processes need to have the pH adjusted to be within a range that's going to be productive for them. And so this isn't something new from that perspective. It's something that we know how to do. It's been really interesting to me working with regulators on these kinds of things and looking at how they perceive the work that we do. When we talk at a global level, I think, and you do a search for, ocean alkalinity enhancement, sort of whatever, safety or ecological safety, there's a certain amount of science that's been done so far. But when you talk about, using a hydroxide in a wastewater context and discharge, there's really well-established safety limits. There's a really good understanding about trace metals. There's a really good understanding about all these things that's built into the regulations that exist today. So regulators on the ground are very comfortable with this. And actually, just anecdotally, we talk to regulators, they almost get giddy about it. It's really funny because typically in a regulatory context, they're looking at this and going, yeah, okay, you want to add lime to a wastewater outfall. Like, we do that all the time. We know exactly how to do that. There's really no problem. And now I can do it for a purpose that is positive, right? That I can actually be contributing to, working on climate, that I can be contributing to something that, the political masters actually really care about, that I really haven't had the leverage to do before. And that is a really, really interesting relationship you get into on the ground with the regulatory environment and policy environment. And it's not to say that we can just simply do this and go and run, right? This is still a responsible, slow scale up, learning process that we have to go through. But those frameworks exist, and I think we have a lot more knowledge that in some cases we think we do at the end of the day.
Just anecdotally, I had a similar experience talking to a person in the wastewater treatment side of the world who just had this, as you described, kind of, I would maybe not giddy, but just a complete chemical understanding, familiarity, very, very comfortable in understanding and the expertise really. But regulators, I think, are not a monolith. And so While you've got regulators who may be quite familiar on the wastewater side, you've got other regulators who have different roles, fisheries, et cetera, who just don't have that same level of familiarity. And so seems to me like there's a really exciting opportunity to do some cross-sector collaboration for the sectors where there are these strong experts, comfort, understanding, longstanding understanding, and folks who are new to the space and have different expertise and can really bring other perspectives. But I do want to, so moderator's privilege to opine for a moment, but I do want to go back to this point on public-private multi-sector collaborations and make sure we don't lose that point, because so critical on the policy side.
Yeah, sure. I have one very specific example. We have this research permit in Iceland, and one of the key parts of that is that as part of the permit, we need to deliver results or deliver results on what happens to the material that we deposit in the deep ocean. This is like from the government based on their kind of evaluation or anything. They want this to be a key thing that we report on. Additionally, a partner of ours, Microsoft, also had that in their contract with us. And this has led to us like working with ONC in Canada, Ocean Networks Canada, as well as participating in research crews with Alfred Wegener in the Arctic and doing our own research project on specifically that. So like we have the private sector, the future customers of ours saying we need more visibility into this facet of your method. We have the government saying we need more visibility into this facet of the method. And we have us going out to partners to evaluating that exact facet of the method. And so I think that's an example of how this kind of trifecta of public-private partnership or collaboration kind of ends up.
So I'll just add something there because I think a big issue is this adversarial attitude towards this, where the understanding is the idea is to scale these over time. So there is the need to create the scaffolds so that you can build the blocks to the point that you can develop a working, like a method, the safest possible way. But the issue is like if you don't have access to do that, you get to the point where you are deciding into this like very strange thing between like what could be the value or the cost of not doing anything, that in a degrading ocean, like the conditions are deteriorating. That is something that we know very clearly, and everything will get more costly. We will like the losses will be major, but that cannot be compared against doing something wrong. So that is the difference between those two is just like doing good science, like doing good field trials, having good collaborations, having a collaborative approach to this, so that you don't end up with a situation where someone just like takes advantage of any loop and starts doing anything, because that is really what will like, and has happened in other situations before, would derail the entire process. So that is why I feel like the transparency and the availability to have partnerships and to create relationships, to build around those connections, to really have a wealth of data, a wealth of field trial experiences, and the like very refined engineering will be key in this process. So I don't think there is something that fundamentally wrong in there. Like I cannot see what is like the ethical, moral issue. I just think that we have a lot of fear now, and that needs to be overcome in some ways. And with safeguards and scaffolds, we can probably address that.
So I actually think that some of that fear is very valuable. I think it's super helpful. And I had a friend once who was a big scuba diver, and he said every time I go scuba diving, I actually look up and see all the case reports of everybody who's died scuba diving over the last 6 months, right? Because it's a dangerous activity, and that forces me to bring the diligence in to make absolutely sure that I am doing everything right and so that I'm safe in what I'm doing. So fear, we often think is a negative thing, but I think it's actually can be very positive in terms of, these kinds of things and making sure that we are looking past our own biases to, doing the right thing and addressing the things in a responsible way. I know myself, I'm a, I'm an entrepreneur. I like to move fast. I want to go as quick as I can to the goal and move forward and everything like that. So to me, what that means is that we need to surround ourselves with people who have real power, who are able to bring in a higher and higher level of caution around the work that we do. Just like Kiddi, in our work, our regulators, we have two regulators. In Halifax, we have a federal regulator and we have a provincial regulator. For the federal regulator, during our field trial, they came once a week and pulled a bucket of the effluent water out, and we're testing that against every permit requirement that they had, right? They don't do that for a wastewater plant, right? But this was a novel thing, and they wanted to be absolutely sure that this was, really well within the permit of what was safe and what was understood to be safe in that context. The provincial regulator had a template, and every week we delivered, as Kiddi said, huge reams of all the data that we had collected for that week and every aspect of everything that we had done in the process and the project. And then on top of that, our academic partners were really gating, how we were running this field trial to ensure that the science was the priority, that ultimately the research was the priority in the trial, not the operation, if you will. And I think that those checks and balances are just absolutely critical within the context of the work that we do, and that we know that, and you talk about public-private partnerships, maybe this speaks to that a little bit, but this idea that nobody does this alone. And if you go alone with these things, I think that there's a very real risk of getting into a place that is irresponsible, that is unsafe. But when you're bringing the whole community along with you, and that you're sharing that data, and that you're working together, that's where I think we have a very robust view of a responsible field trial and the work that we're doing.
Great. We've got about 18 minutes left, so I do want to make sure we have a little bit of time for audience questions. Do we have anyone with a burning question? Great.
What was the question?
Thank you. Thank you for really interesting talks. Great to hear from you all. My name is Natalie Anderson. I'm from the International Programme on the State of the Ocean, and my question was to Mike. You talked quite a lot about the Halifax field trials, and I was just curious to know more about Cornwall, and if you could offer some reflections on how the trial has gone from a public engagement perspective, particularly with regards to building trust in the community, and maybe reflections around the decision to partner with the local water company. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot in that, and we probably don't have time for a huge amount, but I'd be happy to follow up. So a lot of reflections on that. I think that within that community, we've learned a lot along the way, and we've tried to be attentive and listening as much as we possibly could throughout that entire process. To be clear, there was no trial this year there, right? It was deferred because the Environment Agency decided to do, at the request of, I think, we were very supportive of, but also at the request of the community, a very comprehensive and in-depth third-party review with the Water Research Center. That report is not yet released, and so we're looking forward to having that released so that we can have a conversation about, what findings they come up with, what recommendations they come up with, and how that proceeds. So really, that's the next step. The engagement there, like I say, I think we learned an awful lot in that region, in that community. We had, I think, 2 communities really round the bay, and it's been really fascinating. So for those who aren't aware of sort of the region, southwest of Cornwall is actually it's where my family comes from. The next town over from Hale is Cahaland. It actually means cattle land in Old English, and there are really 2 towns around St. Ives Bay. There's a number of towns, but the 2 sort of bigger ones. There's St. Ives and there's Hale. And we really had 2 very different responses to our initial engagement in the region. In the town of St. Ives, there was a lot of concern about a field trial in the region. I think there was, I would say, from the start, from the town council and members of the community, a rejection of what we were doing, and sort of people just did not want a field trial of this technology in the region. On the Hale side, on the other hand, we had a lot of interest, and we had a lot of people who were saying, we want to track this, and we want to see how it goes, and we want to see where this ends up going. I think we've been listening, we've been trying to engage as much as we can. Because there hasn't been any activity over the course of the last little while, there's not a lot to report until the Water Research Center releases their report. But we're committed to continuing to have that conversation, and at the end of the day, it's going to have to be an assessment based on that report, and continued conversations with the community as to whether or not anything does proceed in the region. And I think that's going to be a big conversation that comes up next year, hopefully when we have that final report. So maybe that's just sort of maybe the summary. There's a lot of complexity there, obviously, as you know, and happy to continue that conversation.
I have kind of just an outsider's perspective as someone who's been thinking a lot about public engagement and how to get it right, and how hard it is. And a reflection would be that we are attempting to communicate some of the most complex science that I've ever worked on in my career. As somebody who's worked on climate change for more than 10 years, more than 15 years, and at a level of research that is just incredibly challenging, to be really fair to everyone who is embarking on, I think, what the IPCC, NOAA's research strategy, and many others are saying is something that we really need to get out of the lab, because if this is ever going to scale, we have to address these complex questions in the open ocean, at responsibly and diligently, stepwise, and so really, really hard question to figure out, how do you appropriately communicate this and engage the community where they are, and the urgency. And just one anecdote, moderator's privilege, I suppose, would be, the offshore wind industry. When I came to Carbon to Sea, I had some background in offshore wind and engaging on the offshore wind front, and frankly, thought about public engagement on marine CDR at that scale and level. But we're often talking about projects with research projects of budgets of less than $2 million in comparison to an offshore wind industry of potentially billions of dollars of projects and multiple staff. And so scaling the resources, right-sizing the resources, and I think philanthropy is going to have to play a big role in ensuring that there are the resources that are needed to do it right, to take the time it needs, to take in order to get the outcome that you need. But the theme here that I want to go back to Leo on is, I think, trust, and that was something that you raised. Is that something you want to add to?
Sure. So definitely, the community engagement is one of the most challenging aspects of any industry that has large coverage or impacts, and then figuring out how those impacts are minimized is a big part of it. So participatory design of these projects is relevant. So early participation, very relevant, so that you can really shape things according to what Mike said earlier. Fears can be very productive when you have to make these designs, can be put into in action to create a better outcome. And you can see that in many industries. Of course, not always works, but that is part of the process that you need to improve over time. And we are learning, I guess, how community engagement, or how the process of co-designing these approaches will, how they will look with communities. These are not, as we were hearing before, are not monolithic issues. So it's interesting that that was one of the earliest approaches, or earliest attempts, at community engagement. So it's part of the learning. It's super relevant, and I think it will be just a growing matter. I'm convinced that as part of expanding, growing ocean sciences, it will be that will be a great process for the understanding of these particular issues. So there is a need for scientific communities that engage with like broader communities so that they can go in favor or against this. Like, that's part of the process, especially when we are talking about democratic countries or where democracy is the value at stake. I think there is a lot of opportunity for this to be part of that process.
Maybe just to jump on that, maybe just a tiny little bit, which is that one of the things I think we have to be super aware of in this, and I know this isn't a community engagement panel, but I'm going to take the second on it. And this was driven home to me, and it's really something I never thought about, which is that a community engagement process with something like this, where you're asking people for sort of free, prior, and informed consent, is an imposition on the community. You are saying to people, we need you to learn the stuff that matters to us. Not the stuff that matters to you, but like, now we're coming in here, we want to do this. You have to go learn it. You have to go and understand every aspect of this incredibly complex science and things like that. And I think we have to be aware of the level of request we're making of a community when we do that, and of people within it, right? It's not their priority. Ocean CDR is not the priority of a coastal community. They have a lot of other priorities. Fishing might be a priority, tourism might be a priority. Just living their lives is a priority, and their kids is a priority. And so when you get in there, we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to do our very best to lower the sort of bar in terms of how much of an imposition we're asking people to take on, and we have to do our very best. And we're not going to get it right like every time. I know I get it wrong most of the time, but like at the end of the day, I think that that's a really, really important thing that we need to know in our minds.
And just the note about community engagement is, you said it's not a community engagement panel, no, but policy is politics, and politics is community engagement, and so it all ladders up, and so very, very relevant. I wanted to see if we had one more question in the audience, but
I just wanted to make an additional point, which is, I think, although we're talking about marine CDR here, this is, I think, relevant for almost all larger and more important climate-related changes we're making to the environment, whether that's raising windmills on land or offshore, damming rivers. Like, it's all of the things that all the changes we need to make, have sort of a similar problem. Where we need how can we engage the community, get them on board, if they should be on board, that is, and that's the policy kind of layer, is like how do we do that?
So I would like to open up to one more question in the audience. Sure.
Thank you. Thanks, panel, for your wisdom into this space. It's relatively new to me. I mean, one of the things I was curious about, and it might lead on from what you were saying about the pushback from the engagement from the community. What EIAs do you undertake before even considering doing any of this work? I mean, you might be able to speak to that, but you guys in the in the open ocean, in the Atlantic, do you undertake any EIAs, and what evidence do you get from those that gives you the authority in your minds to go ahead?
And EIA is environmental impact assessment. Great, yeah, good. Good question. I know safety is top of mind for many folks. So. Yes.
Yeah. So every different jurisdiction is going to have its own version of that, right? In EIA and how they approach things. And and I can give you specific examples of how that has gone for us in different areas. For Halifax and in Canada in general, an EIA is triggered by certain aspects of a process. And so if you are, in our case, the scale of the trial did not trigger an EIA. So it's just not a triggering event. It's too small at the end of the day. What triggers an EIA is interesting, right? Like, it's not like how much stuff you put in the ocean. It's how big is your tank, right? So it's a different, like, the triggering points. But the other thing that, makes it not trigger is also if you're within an existing permit range for risk, right? So if you're really sort of sitting there saying, and one of the things I sort of, over 5 minutes, okay, so I'll try to be quick about this. But one of the things that you could think about is think about a counterfactual. And the counterfactual you could think about is if a wastewater facility said, okay, we're currently discharging at the bottom end of the pH range on our permit, they're going to discharge at 6.5 pH, because that's the bottom edge of the range, right? And they came out and said, I'm going to go and discharge at the top end of my range. I'm going to go up to 8.5, right? So now I'm actually a lot more similar to the pH of the ocean that I'm going into. In a way, it's like, well, I'm going to invest in additional sort of chemical feedstock in order to further process my wastewater. I'm going to actually do a better job of making this more similar to seawater as it goes out from a pH perspective, right? That is not something they have to ask for permission for. It's within their permit. They can just do that if they want to. Now they won't. It costs money, and there's no point in doing that. But they could, right? Fundamentally do that. And so if we're essentially doing exactly the same thing, we're just like going, oh, let's go to the top end of their permit. There's generally no trigger from an EIA from that perspective in that kind of thing. Now, the other side of the equation is that it's not being done for wastewater processing. And so therefore, the purpose of the permit is a different purpose than was originally contemplated. And so that's why we get into something like the Water Research Centre independent review, is that the authority in the UK decides that actually, even though that is within the permit range of the facility, we're going to require a different permit sort of regimen that has more of an EIA structure to it. And essentially what we're going through is kind of like an EIA. That's what it is, what the UK government looks at. So, sorry, that's...
And just, you went pretty specific on the policy aspect,
Yes.
obviously, but could you speak to some of the research questions that you are conducting alongside this? Because when I hear the question and I heard the answer, I think you could take away with, we're not doing an assessment of risk, but that is in fact, the purpose of the research. And so just want to make sure we don't lose that point.
Yeah. So we're doing, in the UK, we proposed a plan, which obviously the Water Research Centre thing is going to change.
You have to be brief, unfortunately.
Okay, biological monitoring, chemical monitoring, physical oceanography, looking at baselines, control sites, looking at sampling all the way up to crustacean level, so phytoplankton, zooplankton, sediment drags and drops, and crustacean work. So a huge amount of biological monitoring, eDNA monitoring. Really, there's a huge amount of additional that we put on top of what would typically be required if, as I said, the wastewater facility simply wanted to increase the pH of what they're doing.
Thank you. And okay, great.
I'll just say briefly that as part of that collaborative approach and non-adversarial approach that I was mentioning before, environmental impact assessment is one instrument, but strategic environmental assessment is one direction that governments can take for suitability, for example, to understand what areas have more qualities or elements that, for example, need to be protected, or which areas could be more suitable for any of these trials. So that's something that can be done beforehand, and environmental impact assessment can follow, but it's all a matter of scale. So we have to understand that these are field trials, or not even field trials necessarily, but just tiny experiments. And I'll just leave there.
No,
it's important.
I feel like I wish we had another hour to just talk about this topic, but we don't. And so as we wrap, would love to just hear, looking forward, what are you most excited about? And let's...
Okay, so I'll just one point, which is that adoption is adoption. So clearly, if we are considering any of these technological pathways to have a shot to be one of the elements of the cocktail for solutions, that needs to be done in a collaborative way through partnerships, needs to be done internationally, and that adoption will be crucial, because this is an issue that cuts culture, that cuts politics, like geopolitics, very strongly. And for all of that to work, we need a strong basis of ocean science to advance it.
I'm excited about seeing all the analysis of all the data we've collected so far and being able to release that to the world.
Awesome.
I'm excited about seeing oceans becoming a bigger and bigger part of the agenda at COP. In Paris it was 0% of the text, and now it's becoming bigger and bigger, which I think we need.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here, and I'm really glad to have this discussion. So Round of applause for the panel. Thank you.